Azara, these new laws will also cover online content.
Yes, Claire, so it's going to mean that people who experience that online hate speech will be able to take examples of that and report it to their local Garda station. So it's a significant development in terms of that online sphere. I'm joined now by the Justice Minister, Helen McEntee. Minister, there was a lot of public consultation in this process, and you heard from an awful lot of people examples of cases where reaching prosecution was far too difficult.
Yes, so I mean, what we've tried to do with this legislation is firstly update a law that exists.
Okay, perfect, brilliant. Okay, sorry, I had the microphone setting turned off. Boomer tech is always okay. I'll put a little warning in just to let people know about the kind of technical stuff a little bit at the start, or I'll just edit this out. Okay, right. So, again, thank you very much for everyone joining. So the first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about what this stream will be and will not be. So there have been people who have put everything together and expressed it far more elegantly and far more, charismatically than I ever could. So I'm not necessarily going to talk about like how much of a hideous, totalitarian, crazy bit of stuff this bill is. I mean, that's been done already by a lot of other people. So, well, I might jump into it a bit here and there, but that's not going to be the focus of this. And also, it's not the focus of this is not going to be like, like I'm going to talk about a lot of the law stuff and the acts and the bills and some of the stuff that's been happening at European level in relation to the hate speech laws. I'll talk about that. But this is not going to be like a Tracy O'Mahony style, dissection of everything, because I'm not able for that. Like I wouldn't be able to do it. So what this is is two things, or a number of different things. One of the things this is, or what I'm going to try and do here is, I think the hate speech laws have revealed a number of different things. And I'm going to refer back to a tweet that I put up a few days ago. But basically, the tweet was basically saying, like, we now know, or, like, let me just bring it back. So remember when you were like in school and, you had your, you might have had your science book and you might have had your case study or your example, right? This whole hate speech law has been an absolute down to the button, down to the last dot example of exactly how the system works. And I think for the first time, and I'm going to back this up, is that more and more people know properly how the system works. And what I mean by that is essentially how the NGO sector gets involved and how the consultation system gets involved in all of this. And Varadkar pretty much said it as much in that Gript interview. That's one big thing that's going to come out of this HB. So I think more people are just going to be like, they know how the system works. And this, what I'm going to talk about here, it's like, it's, I mean, we've all noticed this, like we've all talked about this. It's like the vast majority of people don't want the, transgender stuff for kids in schools, but why is it turning up, or the vast majority of people don't want hate speech laws, why is that happening? Or even a huge amount of people don't want the climate change stuff. So why is this happening? And this whole hate speech law thing has been just a case study in everyone just seeing how exactly the system works. So I think that's something very important to kind of hone in on for one thing. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to talk about just some of the strangeness, because there's been a lot of kind of odd things that have kind of happened around it. And then what I'm going to talk about then is I'm going to talk about what are the kind of potential outcomes. What are they going to use this law for, if they're going to use the law at all? I mean, that's another big one as well. And then I'm just going to talk about how this might kind of shift or change people's public perception of all of this. So yeah, just to sum it up, this is kind of more of a, how the system works and how things might change going forward, rather than some, you know, talk about how nonsensical the laws are, or, you know, from a jurisprudence point of view, or, you know, I wouldn't be able to do that. So just to kind of like let you know, kind of in advance, right? So beginning with that, this is, like I was saying before in that big kind of rant there, we now know how the system works, or well, we've known anyway. I mean, this has been just a common talking point among everyone in the kind of like nationalist right community for the past, like, you know, few years. But I think, like I said before, I think more normal people are aware of it now. And the procedure is basically this, and I'm going to talk through the history of the hate speech laws and, you know, what the actual intentions behind it are and all that kind of thing. But basically, how the system works is something like this, right? Step one, the European Council, or the European, the European Council say, we want such a law passed, right? They then bring down the law, and they, you know, this gets sent to a civil service department or the Department of Justice or whatever the hell, and then the Department of Justice are told to bring it in. So how do they bring it in? Well, they dress the whole thing up with getting consultancy firms and expert opinions and academics and NGOs and all of that aboard. They get the answer that they want, then they publish it, and then they tell the public, look, we went through a consultation process, right? And I'm going to talk through exactly how those steps are fleshed out. So step one, European Union says something. Step two, get your, you know, you have to pass what they say. So you get your experts to say what you want, and you cherry pick your experts in terms of NGOs. And then step three, the thing gets passed, and you get the whole kind of like, you know, the expert said, and all of that kind of thing. That's it. I mean, and that works across the board. You look at the transgender and school stuff, I guarantee it'll be the same thing. It'll be like the vast majority of people don't, you know, are against it. But then you've got a couple of LGBT NGOs full of people who are friends or who are buddies with, or who went to school with Varadkar or whoever, and then they just tell them exactly what they want, and then the thing is ticked off, and it has a kind of an official, well, this academic with a, you know, a master's in, you know, grievance studies from Maynooth University. And this also backs up to what I've been talking before about the housing stuff, you know, the right to housing. You know, it's like they want to talk about bringing this right to housing referendum, and, well, how do you do it? Well, you stick Rory Hearn on the board for Home for Good, arguing against the thing that you want to get out of this. It's the same playbook again and again. And the thing is, with the grip.ie interview where Ben Scallon asked Varadkar about all of this, Varadkar just basically said, yeah, well, the whole thing's, he didn't say exactly like this, obviously, but the whole thing's a farce. And I'll get into kind of some of maybe the certain other things as well. I mean, for example, like Morgott has a very good post on, like, you know, how much of this is like malice and how much of this is incompetence. Now, my opinion of that, and I'm going to hopefully back up my points, especially in terms of the hate speech laws, is the very, very top guys, you know, your WEF guys or whoever, they're very smart, very competent people, and they know what they're doing. But if you're, say, for example, I mean, just think of it this way, right? If you're trying to build a house, you know, you're a building company, you want to build a house, right? And you've got a bunch of guys who need to deliver a bunch of, I don't know, bricks to you, right? What happens if the guy who was to deliver the bricks to build your house is an incompetent driver and drives off a cliff somewhere, right? Well, you know, you can be the most competent, in control people in terms of building that house, but if the bricks don't get there, you can't build the house, right? So, you know, you can be on top of this or in charge of the structure, but there's incentives and people and, you know, what people want and desires and social status all up and down the way. And if parts on the bottom start going wrong, then the system stops kind of functioning in a way. So I'm kind of a bit more, I think it's a bit more mixed than just the whole, you know, I mean, the idea that it could be brushed off as pure incompetence, I think, is wrong. And the idea that, you know, I think like that it can be brushed off as just pure malice. Yeah, I mean, there's an awful of malice. And like I said, the top guys I think really know what they're doing, but kind of lower down the chain. And I'm going to reference what I think exactly happened with this, because I think personally what happened, this was not supposed to happen. What I think was supposed to happen was the hate speech laws were supposed to be passed, and that was it. But then the whole Elon Musk, Irish Free Speech Council, and Keith Woods just blew the whole thing up. And it was mainly Section 10, which was the, possession of material section of that which caused the issue. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what is the point of the hate speech law. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quote two people. I'm going to quote Helen McEntee, and I'm going to directly quote Deputy James Brown. So here is Helen McEntee's quote. Quote, "I want to assure the public that we have worked hard to strike a balance in this bill in protecting the right to free speech with protection of vulnerable and minority communities from dangerous hate speech. There are protections of freedom of expression built into this legislation, but ultimately, hate speech is not about free speech. Hate speech is designed to shut people down, to shut them up, to make them afraid to say what they are, who they are, and to exclude and isolate them. There is nothing free about that, and quite frankly, no place for it in our society." Now, I mean, I get it. She's talking about it from someone who might be like seen as kind of a victim group or a minority group or, what have you. There is that, but that's essentially, what the bill is like, I mean, let's be honest, like, you had Simon Harris earlier this week talking about this is to keep people safe and, all of that kind of stuff. No, what's going on is the conditions in Ireland have deteriorated since, well, the crash, and especially since, I mean, John Waters talked about this, like the absolute strangeness of those couple of years, like 2009, 2010, 2011, whereby, the Troika came in and then Fine Gael comes in and, the party that was set up at that time, with Fintan O'Toole and David McWilliams, and I think the name of it was like Democracy Present, or no, it was Democracy Now, right? All of that. But, and, people have kind of like seen up to this, and people are getting a bit, well, more just not happy with the situation. And so, like, you basically just risk, losing your place or using your position or losing your status. But anyway, that's what Helen McEntee has to say on the bill. Now, this is what Deputy James Brown has to say on the bill, and this is what he said on the bill in a debate with Paul Murphy. So, quote, this is, by the way, just for context, this is after Paul Murphy, that clip of him kind of talking about it being a talk crime. This is what James Brown says after that, right? So he says, quote, "I accept the deputy's bona fides in this. He is certainly not in any way trying to downplay what constitutes hatred. This comes from a European Council framework decision. They've set out the requirements to meet that framework decision. If we deviate from the wording used in the bill, we will no longer be in compliance with the framework decision. For other reasons that I set out earlier, but also for this particular reason, I am not in position to accept the deputy's amendment." So it's just the European Council told us to do it, so we're doing it. So those are the two reasons. Reason number one is to shut people up, and reason number two is the European Council told us to do it. So just to bring it back to what exactly the European Council has done. Okay, so basically where I was at was basically so what's going on at European level. Okay, so and by the way, a lot of this stuff I'm referencing is a Tracy O'Mahony video. Tracy has two amazing videos on this, so I'm going to be referencing a bit of that, but then I'm going to kind of bring it in with kind of my own stuff on top of that. So it's not going to be like me stealing Tracy's stuff, but please watch Tracy's two videos on hate speech. You'll find them, like, if you just YouTuber. Tracy O'Mahony, by the way, if anyone hasn't heard of her. But anyway, so basically you have this EU article 83, right? And I'm going to just read out that article now. So, quote, "The European Parliament and the Council may, by means of directives adopted in accordance with ordinary legislative procedure, establish minimum rules concerning the definition of criminal offences and sanctions in the areas of particular serious crimes with a cross-border dimension resulting from the nature or impact of such offences or from special need to combat them. These areas include terrorism, trafficking, goes through all of these, money laundering, corruption, counterfeiting of means of payment, computer crime, and organized crime. On the basis of developments in crime, the council may adapt a decision identifying other areas of crime. This is where the hate speech stuff is being added, that meet the criteria specified in this paragraph. It's act unanimously after obtaining the consent of the European Parliament, right? That's the first step of this. The next step of this is, here's another little trick here. We actually don't have to abide by these laws, because when Ireland signed up to the Lisbon Treaty, right, as part of Protocol 21, Protocol 21 says, Article 1 of Protocol 21, on the position of the United Kingdom and Ireland in respect of the area of freedom, security, and justice. Subject to Article 3, the United Kingdom and Ireland shall not take part in the adoption of the Council of proposed measures pursuant to Title 5 or Part 3 of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union. The unanimity of the members of the Council, with exception of the representatives of the Government of the United Kingdom and Ireland, shall be necessary for the decisions of the Council, which must be adopted unanimously. For the purposes of this article, a qualified minority shall be defined in accordance with Article 2383 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. So basically, and this is according to Tracy, but I'm just kind of reading out some of her stuff there, we actually don't have to be in this thing. We actually don't, right? But here's what happened. So here's a screenshot, or here's something I'm reading out from a Dáil Éireann debate on Wednesday, the 9th of March, 2022. Proposal for a council decision on hate speech and hate crime motion. So I'm going to start reading out Helen McEntee's speech here. So Helen McEntee says, I thank the Ceann Comhairle for facilitating the motion. I also thank the House. Yesterday, the government approved my request to seek the House's approval to opt into this EU Commission proposal. The proposal seeks to extend the list of EU crimes under Article 83, the one I was reading before, of the Treaty of the Function of the European Union, TFEU, to include hate crime and hate speech by the way of council decision. And here's Helen McEntee's own opinions on hate crime. Hate crime is so corrosive of the social solidarity and mutual understanding we need between groups in this increasingly diverse Ireland. The government has no hesitation in commending to the House the motion that we opt in. Opting in under Article 3 will allow us to be involved in the detailed discussions of this measure and help us shape the final text, right? So we opted into this thing on around then, like 9th March 2022. And just even before that, here is the European Commission's, what they actually did to make us come in as late as March 2022. So I'm just reading out on some of the European law here. So hate-motivated crime and speech are illegal under EU law. The 2008 Framework Decision on combating certain forms of expression of racism and xenophobia requires the criminalization of public incitement to violence or hatred based on race, color, religion, descent, or national or ethnic origin. The European Commission, as guardians of the treaties, monitors the correct implementation of this framework decision through dialogue and, when needed, infringement proceedings. On the 9th of December 2021, the European Commission adopted a communication which prompts a council decision to extend the current lists of EU crimes in Article 83 to hate crimes and hate speech. If this council decision is adopted, the European Commission would be able, in a second step, to propose secondary legislation allowing the EU to criminalize other forms of hate speech and hate crime in relation to racist or xenophobic views. So, with all of that, just to sum up, this is what's happened. We opted into Article 83. Okay. We didn't have to. As part of the Lisbon Treaty, we can opt out. I think countries, like Hungary and Poland, might have opted out, or in their own way, but whatever. We had the choice to opt out. We didn't. At the end of 2021, the European Commission extended Article 83 to include hate crime, hate crime. A couple of months later, McEntee starts talking about opting into this, which we've done. And that's why you started seeing the hate crime legislation coming in now. Now, there's a couple of extra complications to that. Let me just grab a glass of water there. But essentially, that's what's happened. Now, This was supposed to come in by the end of 2022. Now, there might have been some funny stuff going on there. I mean, I think, to be honest, I think one thing that might have like put a spanner in the whole works was Enoch Burke, because the Enoch Burke thing just like, you know, like whatever your kind of opinions on Enoch Burke are, he he stayed in Mountjoy for what 100+ days and they let him out. He won that, and he got the sympathy of an awful lot of people, and I think that kind of scared them in terms of bringing in the hate crime or the hate speech law content, right? So that's one thing, and I think there might have been even a couple of kind of switch-arounds with like, you know, getting Helen McEntee out of there and getting Harris in there as well. That kind of stuff could have been going on as well. So that's the framework. That's why it's happening now. It's because this European Commission thing. So, like James Brown said, in a very like I'm saying it in a much less elegant way than him, but basically the reason these hate speech laws are coming in is because the European Commission told us to do so. So that's basically it. So that's the first part of this. Now, the other part of this, which I find very interesting, well, there's two parts of this which I find very, very interesting. Well, actually, no, sorry, there's three parts of this I find very, very interesting, and it's been the response from certain groups. One of them has been from people in kind of like the NGO sector, because I've been taking a look at like how exactly they've responded to this. I've taken a look at kind of responses to people actually within Fine Gael themselves, and a couple of very interesting remarks from people like even Peadar Tóibín of too, right? And this is where things get very interesting, because I think these remarks point to something, point to a few things. So the first one is Peadar Tóibín came out with a very weird but very interesting remark when he was talking to Niall Boylan, Classic Hits, recently. And he basically just said that, I'm kind of paraphrasing him here a bit, but he said it's actually quite common. And this makes sense. And I remember even during the COVID thing, one of the MEPs in Europe said this, but he said that like what happens with a lot of like Irish politicians or politicians in general is that they put all this legislation together, the various civil service departments put all this legislation together, write all of this stuff up, and they don't actually really get read or looked at. I mean, for example, I remember like one of the MEP examples I heard would be that like, you'd be an the MEP in Europe, and then you get a bit of legislation which is like thousands of pages long, and it deals with the sale of cabbages, and it's the most boring, dry fucking law-filled, tedious document to read. And a lot of these guys kind of go, well, another bit of legislation to pass. Let's just tick the box on that. Now, let me just make this kind of clear. I'm not kind of saying like, I'm not saying, oh, these guys just didn't read it and they're like, they're not to blame whatsoever. But I think the reason he's coming out with comments like that is I'll kind of go into it in more detail, but I think they've kind of like screwed up in a couple of ways here. And there are a couple of ways they could get out of that screw up. But one of the ways they'll get out of it is they'll essentially have to admit that they didn't read the fucking thing. But I think that wouldn't be the most outlier theory there. And I just thought it was interesting that he put that in, that like, all these civil service, all these departments, they write all together, all this legislation, all of that. A chunk of them don't read it. They're just told to vote on it, keep everything in line with the party, or, they don't want to step out of line. When Varadkar leaves Fine Gael, he wants that nice job in Europe somewhere, doing something on a board of some company or whatever, or some other EU institution. So they do this, they keep their noses clean, they get told, they pass the legislation, and, away we go. So I thought that was interesting. And the other part of that as well, which I also thought was very interesting, was Charlie Flanagan, of all people. Sorry, one sec. Had an interview with the Irish Independent. And in that interview, he was talking about how it, and this only came out a few days ago, but he was talking about like how it's really bad that like you have these hard left NGOs telling us what to do. Now, like that's a fucking great sign in the way that like, you know, the whole kind of people are kind of way more aware of like the NGO complex and how it actually works. But you know, when you see Tobin make comments about that, and when you see, you know, Charlie Flanagan make comments about that, these are kind of like, you know, well, don't blame me, if that kind of makes sense, you know, or I saw it coming. I saw the fact that these guys weren't reading all of this, and I saw the fact that like, you know, these NGOs had this big impact, you know, like these guys are just trying to save their own asses in a way. But I thought that was interesting as well. And then I've been taking a look at the some of the people who work in NGOs, like what's been their response to this. And a lot of them are saying stuff like, you know, bin the bill and get rid of it, and I'm against the bill, and you know, it's just going to strengthen the, you know, extremist far right, you know, and all this kind of nonsense, you know. So there's a little bit of a feeling there, or at least I kind of think that like this was not supposed to happen. And the main part of that this was not supposed to happen was included up in Article 10. You know, Article 10, I mean, other countries have hate speech laws. The UK has very draconian hate speech laws, but Article 10 is the one that's really crazy. And, you know, again, I'm not a litigious person, but if you take a look at the actual article itself, so I'll just read off what this is. So basically what it says is interpretation. So I'm just reading out the definition of hatred itself, which appears all the way through the rest of the Act. And this is what their definition of hatred is, right? Hatred means hatred against a person or a group of persons in the state or elsewhere on account of their protected characteristics or any one of these characteristics. Hatred means hatred. It's a fucking tautology. You know, hatred means hatred. Like where there is no definition of hatred there. So I think, and you know, then it goes into section 10, which is like, you know, the really outrageous part about like possessing hateful material, but we don't know what the definition of hatred is, right? So here's what I think happened. Because I think if you kind of roll it back, and this goes back into the mix of like competence and incompetence thing I was talking about before. Here's what I think happened, right? They want hate speech laws. They brought it in. They, you know, they want to get their NGO answer out of that, and then we're good to go, right? What happened, I think, is if you take a look at the kind of people who end up in NGOs, just from a kind of a education point of view, skills point of view, and who ends up in the civil service point of view, what you end up getting is a lot of people who are basically, they've got arts degrees, they don't have real practical skills. They get through the university system, they get all the kind of like crazy stuff thrown at them. They come out of university with no skills, and the only places that they can apply to are NGOs and, you know, the public sector and all that kind of stuff. And the other thing with what's been going on right in Ireland right now, and I'll jump into some of this stuff a little bit later on as well, is basically like a lot of our institutions have been deteriorating. And, you know, it would be the case that, like, you know, 30, 40 years ago, that if you got into the civil service, you know, you'd be quite smart. You know, you'd be smart and competent and be able to do all the administration work and legal work. What's been happening increasingly over the past 10 and a bit years is, and this goes back into my kind of like when I was talking about it, like agreeableness equals public civil service. Yeah, that's exactly it. So like, I mean, I did a video on this when I used to make videos on YouTube about the civil service. You know, it selects for people who were compliant, very conscientious, you know, often very smart in their own ways, but very, very agreeable and not open to new ideas and wanting every day to be exactly the same. And one of the things that's been happening, you know, like there's all these articles about, like, you know, people are demoralizing the guards, people are demoralizing farming, people are, you know, all of this. And one of the reasons that's happening is because, you know, even a few decades ago, and, you know, you can say a lot about them, but the boomers in this country were actually kind of were able to keep shit running and knew what they were doing. So, you know, if you got into the Department of Justice as a civil servant like 30, 40 years ago, you would have had to do an IQ test. You would have near top that IQ test. You would have been pretty smart, right? You would have been pretty smart. You would have been pretty competent. You wouldn't have even been that ideological. You would have been just like that comment say there. You would have just done your stuff and that's it. What's happening now is the NGO sector and the civil service, I think, is being full of a lot of these kind of ideological people. And increasingly, and this even goes into something like Edward Dutton has talked about, you know, declining intelligence and, you know, people's IQs have been declining. I think we've got a group of people who are simply less and less capable over time of just being able to write functioning proper legislation that makes sense. So just to be clear, I'm not saying this whole HP's laws, oh, they accidentally did it because of incompetence. No, the thing is completely intentional. The HP's laws are completely intentional. There's a focus behind them. There's a goal behind them, and they want to bring them in. You know, I mean, look, even stuff like they're trying to bring them in Canada and Brazil at the same time. But I think what happened is, but what was supposed to happen, I think, is we were supposed to get like HP's laws, maybe a bit more similar to the UK, and they would have just been passed. Not much attention would have been provided to it. No one would have criticized McEntee because the media loved McEntee and, you know, Simon Harris and all that, and it would have passed. But because the bill was drafted in a massively incoherent manner, and a massively totalitarian manner, and a massively nonsensical manner, combined with Elon Musk, combined with a bit of luck from Elon Musk, Keith Woods, all of that, the bill is an absolute mess, and now it's got public knowledge all across the world. I think that's what's happened. You know, I mean, you can kind of, I mean, if you disagree, fair enough, but like the bill is just so, you know, in a lot of ways, it's just so kind of incoherent. I mean, they could have just gone down the line of other countries, but then, like, even like they literally can't even define hatred in the bill, you know. And like I said before, that's why you're seeing a lot of these guys, like even kind of very left wing people, like your Paul Murphy, saying this bill is nonsense. Like, I mean, I just to clarify, he wants hate crime or hate speech laws, but he doesn't want them. You know, he doesn't want this thing in it because he realizes, like, I think he realizes, yeah, that this thing is set up to fail, or there's a lot of issues with it. And like I said, whether it's that Pater Tobin comment or the, you know, maybe Charlie Flanagan being a bit more kind of switched on, I think that's what's happened there. And then the other part of that is the Ben Scallon interview. And actually, no, I want to talk about this in this way. I want to talk about two more things first. I want to talk about the media's response to us, and I want to talk about Simon Harris and Leo Varadkar's responses to this, because in my opinion, like they're the two responses that they have had been absolutely disastrous, and I'll talk about that in just a second. So just bear with me 1 second now. So the first thing is, I think it's a good idea to take a look at what groups consulted the government in this process, right? So if I just open the link here, actually this link is like, it basically goes into like hate speech consultation submissions from groups, right? And it's hilarious. Like all of these are like NGOs, and there's some really funny ones here. Like there is the atheist hate crime submission, you know, and the atheist hate crime, like it does all this stuff, like, you know, we don't believe people should believe in, you know, flying spaghetti munchers, you know, all this kind of stuff, you know. But it's, some of the entries are just mad and funny, but it's all kind of very left-wing NGO groups and left-wing NGO people all the way. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions. There's the Edmund Burke Institute and all that, who are fully against this and all that. But there's two I want to read, and I think these two are very important. And also, these also explain things, because in the way that, like, you also have the issues with, you know, the ditch, and, you know, it's almost even becoming a little bit of a news story in and of itself. Like, why did the media not pick up on the ditch? Well, I think reading just two accounts from the National Union of Journalists and the Independent News Media will be able to kind of clarify that a bit. So let me just bring up some of the comments that they had. So this is Independent News and Media's comment on hate speech, right? So here it is. Quote, "We note that there is currently an Online Safety Act in the pipeline that proposes the introduction of an Online Safety Commissioner. There would appear to be extensive overlap between this initiative and the matter in which modern digital communications allow for the dissemination of hate speech. In our submission, the Online Safety Act may be a better and more targeted way of dealing with the proliferation of hate speech than an expansion of the existing provision on the incitement to hatred legislation. At the very least, the Online Safety Act and a review of hate speech legislation must proceed in tandem so that they can be properly complement each other and target deliberate dissemination of hate speech and other harmful content without inadvertently criminalizing genuine public debate. In summary, INM fully supports efforts to target deliberate hate speech, but it is paramount that good intentions do not give rise to unintended consequences. In particular, we would be strongly opposed to any collateral chilling effect on genuine public debate. Any legislative provision that potentially opens the door to criminalizing the works of bona fide news reporters and commentators would be truly alarming development that would not only endanger the civil liberties of individual journalists, but would also undermine wider debate of the issues that affect our society at large." So yeah, basically all they're saying is, yeah, we support hate speech laws, but not for us. You know, like these fuckers, like, I mean, like, and it also just goes into this, like, this Online Safety Commissioner stuff, because like what they're just trying to do is they're just trying to push everyone else out, like, you know, like it, I mean, and Morgott made this point as well, like, you know, when people like talk about these, you know, oh, these people are Marxists or not. No, they're, maybe they are a little bit, but they're probably not. They're lads who work for a big company, and a lot of the time they don't want independent journalists coming in and stealing their shit, right? You know, you're a journalist, you get your degree in journalism, you get on the Simon Cumbers Fund, you build up your connections, you know, you say Leo's a ledge a bunch of times, right? And then what you do is, you know, you're not going to like it when some guys online are just like completely outperforming you with like nowhere near the amount of resources. You're not going to like that. So you just want those people to shut down, you know. And the other thing, I mean, like I've said before, journalists, you know, a lot of the times they end up in these kind of jobs or positions which have a disproportionate amount of status, disproportionate amount of pay. They have no real kind of transferable work skills. Their status is all tied up with that. So because of that, they've got nowhere else to go. And because of that, they have to kind of go along with everything the regime says. Then the other bit I wanted to read out is from the report. Well, not the report. Sorry, the consultation from the National Union of Journalists. I want to read that out. So the National Union of Journalists acknowledged the importance of striking a balance between freedom of speech and the regulation of speech, which is intended to stir up hatred or prejudice against individual groups on the basis of defined characteristics and without any claim of observing the public interest. The right to express controversial views, to express unpopular opinions, and even to express views which some people may find offensive is important to a free press and to democracy. Limiting hate speech is not about avoiding giving offense or curtailing the right to freely express an opinion, but about seeking to prevent or to punish the abuse the right to freedom of expression in a manner which has harmful consequences. Yeah, we used to, I mean, like, you know, if you're talking about that stuff, you're talking about maybe, I don't know, like defamation or something like that, but defamation is not free speech. We already have stuff like that covered, you know. Often it is not the opinion that might be harmful, but the manner it is expressed. Like, what does that even fucking mean? You know, like, many of these challenges being considered by review are also being considered in the United Kingdom, and the attention is drawn to the submission of the National Union of Journalists to the White Paper of Online Harm, published by the NUJ in June 2019. Now, this is a really good bit, right? The role of the media. It is recognized that the review is part of a wider program aimed at addressing the problem of intolerance and hatred. An open, tolerant democracy also needs a thriving media. Citizens are entitled to a diversity of media and to independent, verified news. Oh yeah, the independent verified news. Yeah. Philip Dwyer was getting 2,000 viewers on live streams, and you shut him down. Yeah, that one. Yeah, okay, cool. Or even the way that, like, even something like The Ditch, the way that, oh, it's just Russian, propaganda. Obviously this is a clown show, but anyway, I'll move on. So I'll just get to the main part. This is the interesting part. The NUJ has long called for a commission on the future of media in Ireland, which would address issues of ownership and control, diversity, plurality, and training, as well as media literacy. The media performs a vital role in calling power to account and in challenging public figures and the powerful people who directly or indirectly exploit ignorance, fear, and intolerance. In the recent by-elections, the media played a significant role in alerting the public to racist comments made by candidates. The promotion of strong independent media and the protection of public service broadcasting is vital to democracy. So, I mean, there you go. Like, what all they're doing there is, like, we want everyone else pushed out, and we want this commission for the future of media to be set up so that we're protected. We're in our own group. We can do as much kind of media analysis or none as possible, and we're going to bring our own people in, and that's it. Now, I mean, obviously, there's a number of big problems with that. And the big problem with that is, if you did that, you wouldn't get a Ditch story. You wouldn't get an Elon Musk thing. You wouldn't get any of that happening. So that's what they really are kind of working on, and that's really where this whole thing comes from. So if you're wondering, like, why these guys are not talking about it, this is a big reason. They want it. I mean, it's there in the consultation literature, gov.ie, anyone can read it themselves. And it also, I mean, it also goes into other factors as well, like personality of journalists, the fact of the matter that, a lot of these newspapers and a lot of these media industries are completely reliant on the government and advertising and government funding. And if they were to go against that, that could be pulled, or, they could be ostracized, or, yeah, I mean, being ostracized is a big one. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the guy. He's fairly well known. There's a sports journalist called Ewan McKenna, and he started speaking out about the lockdowns being really bad. And what happened is he had journalists smearing him and calling him a far-right extremist, and saying, we don't want to work with you anymore. You're not one of us. You'll never work in the industry again. And McKenna has provided or talked about this in streams and all that kind of thing, and tweets. Like, this is what they do. If you don't comply with Leo's allege and all of that, they'll try and kick you out. Basically, they'll try and get rid of you just like that. So that's why they're not reporting on this. And also, there's other incentives as well. I mean, if they kind of say the right things or kind of are propped upwards by government ministers and all of that, they get jobs, quote unquote, researching for and advising and communications officers and all of these kind of sham jobs or sham situations, basically, so that's why you're not seeing any of that. So I thought that was an interesting point to flag. So the next two things, I know we're about 45 minutes in. There's about 2 or 3 more points I want to make before kind of finishing up. So, like I said, we've talked about where this bill has come from. We've talked about where it's how it was kind of put together and the response to it. The next thing I want to talk about, like I was just speaking before I got into the journalist thing, is the Varadkar and the Simon Harris response to all of this. Both of them are kind of remarkable in their own ways. I mean, I'll start with the Simon Harris one. First of all, I just find it very interesting that, like, 25% of Ireland's tax receipts, right, are, come from this corporation tax stuff. And Twitter is here, and Twitter is a big part of that. And so you have an interview with Simon Harris, and Simon Harris starts talking about, well, I don't get my philosophy from the Trump family or from, Elon Musk and his associates. See, that's that's got to be a really stupid thing to do, because, I mean, remember Elon Musk talking about, like, the Twitter files? Well, I'm sure there's a lot of dirt in Ireland there. I mean, we've all known, or I mean, the Birkin have covered this extensively about, like, civil servants moving in and out of, like, these tech jobs and all that kind of thing. Geroy talked before about Rory McKiernan and a couple of very strange tweets that he put out, in relation to hacking. And I've talked about this before as well. I mean, during the lockdowns, there were journal.ie articles talking about, Varadkar has just contacted, Varadkar said he'll contact his friends on Twitter to shut down debates. I'd say there's like, if there's a Twitter files thing that Musk is talking about, then there's a Twitter files thing for here. And if Musk was to talk about that in any kind of more detail, that could be a big mess or a big humiliation for, the Irish government, for one thing. Another thing it would do as well is that it would actually end up stemming the flow a little bit of that movement of people from maybe the public sector to public sector as well to say, stuff like this, like tech area as well. And the other thing as well is, like, with stuff like the Digital Services Act, I mean, and with this hate speech stuff, like in possession of hateful material, is that going to just cause a massive headache for, like, Twitter? Like, I mean, if you've got all the data center stuff here and all this data is on all these servers here, like, how much of a headache is that going to cause? And, considering the disproportionate power Twitter might have here, how much are Twitter going to agree with any or a lot of things that the Irish government say? So the idea of just kind of going, yes, Elon Musk is associates. Yeah, it might not be the smartest thing to do, but I mean, the thing is just silly. I mean, like, there's a couple of articles here, like I have up here, and it also goes back into the media compliance with the whole thing. I mean, I'm just reading an article from the Irish for the Irish Independent by Declan Lynch, right? And this is the headline, right? This is the actual headline, and this is not satire. This is this is completely true, and you can look this up yourself, right? If Elon Musk, Donald Trump Jr., and Jordan Peterson are against it, then the matter is settled. Like that. Like, that's it. That's, it's like, if they say it's bad, then it must be good. These are the people who you want on your online media commission, the people who will be charged of, like, media literacy. That's it. That's the level you're talking about, or even like, when all these papers were talking about the Simon Harris response to all of this, there's all these articles that say stuff like, and there's a common denominator with a lot of them, so the Irish Examiner have so basically Simon Harris slams down Trump criticism of Ireland's hate crime law. Okay, here's another one. Simon Harris dismisses Trump Musk concerns over new Irish hate speech laws, right? Justice Minister Simon Harris has hit back at criticism of proposed hate speech legislation in Ireland, saying that any time the Trump family or Elon Musk have a different view from you, that's not a bad day at the office. The thing is, like, it was Donald Trump Jr. who said that, not Trump, right? So they're trying to imply here very implicitly that it was Trump that said it, and by doing that, they activate the whole kind of, orange man bad thing, because the vast majority of Irish people don't like Trump, right? So they're just trying to smear it by association like that. But again, it's not, again, like, is this a ground, or is this an area that they kind of really want to be, like, going into or going down? And, I don't think it is, like, or it's something which could have a lot of, like, unintentional consequences. And then you have the, and it was remarkable because, I mean, all he had to do was basically say, I respect Elon Musk's opinion, blah, blah, blah. we believe it is the right thing or something like that. Not say it like that, you know. Or another one was you know, when Varadkar was asked about like, and he basically just, you know, I mean, I'm trying to just remember the quote now. He's basically saying that like it was, I don't know, what did he say? He said it was like good practice, you know, to find out. Oh, here I have the quote here. It's good practice to find out what people's thoughts are on the issue, and then about 5 seconds later, he was saying like, you know, those submissions were not reflective of public opinion. I mean, you know, I mean, one of the surprising things that I thought when I read that was that why didn't he just say something like, well, yeah, that's true, but you know, who would you trust more, a lecturer or an academic who knows the field well, or submissions of kind of, you know, whoever? And I think we need to listen to the experts in this one. I mean, if he said something like that, you know, but he didn't, like, which is brilliant. I mean, I'm glad he didn't, obviously, but like, it just kind of goes back to my thing a little bit that, like, you know, maybe the top guys are, you know, there is an agenda to a degree, and the top guys know what they're doing. But the more and more you go down, and the more the system is built, the more you start seeing these kind of like just very strange things just happening, which I don't think were meant to happen. I think what was supposed to happen with this was supposed to be passed. No one was supposed to pay it any attention. And then you get what you get what John Waters calls the glass jaw effect, and people are way less likely to kind of talk about it and talk to each other. But Article 10, you know, the possession stuff, really gathered the mire, or the, you know, really started freaking people out, and rightly so. It's frightening, actually, to say the least. So, you know, it's a mad one. All right. So anyway, just on that goes into like what I think comes next. And let me just see how many people are here. Oh, cool. That's a job. 22 people. Right. Hold on. Just give me one quick second here. I might when I'm kind of uploading this later, I might you know, I might just have to download it and re-edit a couple of bits, especially a couple of waffling things at the start with the sound. But yeah, just bear with me. So I'm just going to list out a bunch of potential scenarios, what can come from all of this. So we're near the last stage now. It's gone to the upper house, it's gone to the Seanad. So the bill is true. It's just a case of like, can any amendments be put in, and will people vote on those amendments, you know, to get, like, say, Article 10, which is the possession stuff, out, and then we get a much less crazy version of the bill. Is that likely? It would make them look like a joke, you know. It's kind of like, why did you vote your own bill in and then amend to it later on, you know? And I think that's where the Peadar Tóibín comment, the 50% didn't read it, comes in, because, you know, then he would kind of say, or other people say, did you actually read the thing? Otherwise, why would you vote in the why would you vote it in and then make amendments to your own bill in that way later on? I don't know exactly how possible that is. I mean, the way that they're talking, you know, the Simon Harris thing, it doesn't seem, I wonder how likely that is to happen. I mean, maybe even in a sense that could be a bad thing if that happens, and the reason being is that, like, you know, it's like when during the lockdown, NEFA did this whole thing of like, yeah, we want a level 5 restriction, and then, you know, the government, or even though they're the same thing essentially, you know, Varadkar will come in and go, no, that's too much. We need a level 3 restriction. And then what you would get from the public is, oh, okay, you know, well, it's bad, but it's not as bad as it could have been. I wonder, could that happen? But I don't. The other thing too is I don't think so, because I like I said, if even if they were to do that at that stage, you know, you'd have all this attention kind of going on. Well, you still brought in extreme hate crime legislation whereby no one knows what hatred is. You know, you still have that problem, and now everyone's attention is on it now, and everyone will be watching the Seanad now. But also, it'll make them look increasingly like a joke. It's like, why did you do that to your own bill? So there's that option. Then there's the option of it gets passed on to Michael D. Higgins, and then he has the option of like just, you know, signing it in or sending it on to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court say it's okay, then it can't be challenged again, as far as I know. No, I mean, I don't know how that could go. Like again, I'm maybe someone like Tracy O'Mahony would be better for that stuff. But if it was to be passed by Michael D. Higgins, I mean, does anyone expect? I mean, honestly, like, would he be the kind of person to do that? I don't think so. He's completely like, I'd be very, very surprised if he passed it on to the Supreme Court. I'd say he would just kind of almost pass it in a sense. But then if you got to that stage, you could argue maybe that's a better thing, because then people could kind of go the judicial review avenue. But then maybe the issue then is like you're into increased costs, and when does the whole thing get to a stage where it's kind of pushed forward or all of that. So, but then like if this thing is passed, I mean, like I said, even from a basic just reading of it, I mean, how can you arrest someone for hatred when the definition for hatred is hatred itself? Like I don't get it. Like, I mean, like if there was something like, if there was a bit like, oh, it's very explicit and it's like you using a slur or something like that, but there's nothing here. Like it's bizarre like that. And I think a lot of people I think there's a section of people who might just go off and challenge us. I mean, like there's a UCD, professor of law guy, Gerard Casey, and he just said like, look, this thing is just massively incoherent, like, But then again, if you get to that stage, I mean, are they going to risk any kind of like blowback from this? Like, because the other thing too is like, and they learned this from the Enoch Burke thing. Like, if they prosecuted the wrong person under this, it could absolutely massively backfire. I mean, like, if you prosecuted some, for example, right-wing nationalist guy, right, you risk on their side, massively expanding the reach very, very quickly. Potentially, like, I mean, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I mean, would they actually do that? I mean, they could. I mean, I think, there could be a chance that they use these laws. I do think so. But I think if they were to use them, I think they would do them in a certain way. So, for example, like, if you remember back to the lockdowns, right? If you remember back to the lockdowns, they were saying, oh, it's illegal to not wear a mask. No, it wasn't. It wasn't. You didn't have to wear the mask. It was in the statutory instrument. Like, you didn't have to wear the mask if you had a reasonable excuse. And you never had to define what a reasonable excuse was. I mean, I didn't wear the mask pretty much, and I had my reasonable excuse. And and anyone would back me up here if they did the same thing. Beyond a couple of people looking at me in a funny way, or get someone going up to me and saying, hey, could you put on the mask, please? And I would say, oh, sorry, man, I'm exempt. Is that all right? And he 99 times out of 100 would be like, yeah, that's fine. That's no problem at all. Like, I got in no trouble for it. Thankfully, in that way, we were blessed, But I mean, I heard in Spain, like, if you were to do something like that, yeah, the police were not happy with that at all. But the people who did get arrested, like, they weren't arrested on the masking. What happened was that they were arrested on public order offenses. So I wonder, are they just gonna, with this, are they gonna go for the low hanging fruit guy? In other words, like, they use this in an example whereby there's a bunch of people at a protest, and there's a guy who actually does commit a crime or an offense, and then they use it to bolster that charge, something like that. Or is it a case that, I mean, to put it bluntly, like, they don't want to do it to an Enoch Burke guy, I don't think, because if they did it to an Enoch Burke, it could be an absolute PR disaster. But what if they were to do it to, yeah, a low-hanging fruit person, you know, someone who, you know, for lack of a better phrase, you know, is Edward Norton in American History X? Let's just, you know, leave it at that. I mean, you all know what I mean, and you know, it's Telegram. I can say what it is actually, but you know, I just think it's funnier that way. You know, someone who the public just can't sympathize with whatsoever, and then once you know you get maybe that case, the public is kind of more like, well, you know, we have these Edward Nortons running around the place, you know, we need these laws, you know, and then it's accepted a little bit, and then the kind of like the lockjaw kind of like John Waters was talking about kind of like descends into it. But I think the idea that like they're gonna go after every single person with like a Pepe meme on their computer, I think, you know, it's not practical. I mean, like, yeah, I don't think it's practical. I mean, I don't think they can do it. I mean, like the people are leaving the Gardaí like crazy right now, for example, and you know, like there's a recent Irish Times article talking about the fact that the prisons are full. You know, it's like, where are you going with this? I think if I was just to make a guess, but like everything is open now, and the whole legislation is a giant Pandora's box. It's just so weird in that way. But if I was to guess a little bit what was to happen, I'm going to refer back to a Tracy O'Mahony video, and I think I'll finish it up after just I talk to this point here. So Tracy O'Mahony in one of the older videos had a point that like they've been trying to bring in some of this stuff a bit through the back door already in a couple of different acts. So one of the acts is the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Act of 2020. And I'm just going to read out a bit there. So under the section distributing, publishing or sending threatening or grossly offensive communications, a person who by any means distributes or publishes any threatening or grossly offensive communication about another person or sends any threatening or grossly offensive communication to another person and with intent by so distributing, publishing or sending to cause harm is guilty of an offence. For the purposes of subsection 1, a person intends to cause harm where he or she, by his or her acts, intentionally seriously interferes with the other person's peace and privacy or causes alarm or distress to the other person. So there's that. And then there is also the non-fatal offences against the person amendment with the Stalking Bill 2021. And I'm just reading out Tracy's extract here. In this section, stalking behaviour means engaging one or more than one of the following: persistently following, watching, pestering, or communicating by any means of communications with or about a person. Sorry, it's a little bit of a blurry image here. Let me just zoom in a bit. Perpetrating to be the other person, attempting to make repeated unwanted contact with a person or any other repeated unwanted behavior towards a person. And I'm just skipping down to the main parts. F, monitoring or spying on a person by any means. So finally, then we have this is the Online Hate Act, I think. So it goes into the harm, offence, incitement, and authority of state. So it says a broadcaster shall not broadcast, and a provider of an audiovisual on-demand media service shall not make available in a catalogue of the service anything which may reasonably be regarded as causing harm or offence, anything which may be reasonably regarded as likely to promote or incite crime, anything which may be reasonably regarded as conduct falling within Article 5 of the European Parliament on combating terrorism, anything which may reasonably be regarded as likely to incite violence or hatred directed against any group of persons or member of any group, based on the grounds referred to in Article 21 of this Charter, or anything which may be reasonably regarded as tending to undermine the authority of the state. A failure to comply with subsection 1 shall be a controversial for the purpose of Part 8b. So, I wonder, just like the COVID laws, is there a chance that they'll just pass this and they'll never use it? And they'll use this stuff that's already on the books if they wanted to. You know, and then they still get their chill effect, but they still, you know, it fits what the European Commission want, basically. So I don't know. I mean, like the thing is so crazy. It really is, like how vague and how opaque the whole thing is. Um, hold on, there's a comment there, and it's a demonstration. Oh yeah. This is the project management and IT thing, isn't it? Yeah. No, I mean, I agree with that. There's a lot of like really like interesting stuff in that. Like it, like I'm very interested personally, like in how companies work and how leaders become leaders and how things work and all that kind of thing. And I think that that's a big component of what we're seeing right now, because like I said before, you know, if you end up with a bunch of like, you know, arts degree, women's studies, people in your Department of Justice and they can't properly draft legislation, well, they write weird stuff like hatred is hatred, and then you get stuff like this. And I think, like I said, that's where that's come from. Cheers, though. Thank you very much. So that's a possibility as well, that they just, a bit like the blasphemy law, they use it, but it's there, but they use the other stuff that's already been there and there for a couple of years, you know. And what are the results of this? Well, I just want to reference something there very quickly. And it is a reference to a post that Joe Blogg left. And he made an interesting kind of post there about like 10 Fianna Fáil councillors hold talks with Mattie McGrath's rural party. That's a weird one, because I think they're starting to realize that, like, you know, a nationalist right would actually have a bit of support in this country. But the thing is with that is, you know, you need to talk about like why people vote, why people go about things in a certain direction. You know, why would someone vote for a nationalist party? I mean, you know, and then if you were to get Mattie McGrath and he just kind of like had that kind of, oh, well, he's in the Dáil anyway, kind of legitimacy, along with a bunch of Fianna Fáil councillors. Again, I'm not saying these people are completely lined up or anything like that, but what I am saying is that I could see a scenario whereby, like, if that was to gain any momentum, that would actually just, yeah, it would take away a lot from the from any kind of like nationalist kind of thing, like a NP or a IFP, because they've got that kind of like, well, you know, he gets stuff done already and he's already in the council kind of thing. But I think that kind of stuff is more likely to happen as things go forward. And I think just from what I've kind of seen with comments on, like, you know, people talking about the NGOs or people in the NGOs talking about this bill, all of that kind of thing, I think, I mean, like I'm kind of like maybe not massively optimistic, but I am kind of optimistic in a way. I think we are going to get hate speech laws, you know, as messed up as that is. But at the same time, I do believe that we are still, you know, the Enoch Burke thing might have made them realize, yeah, okay, this might not work or as much as we'd want. And the recent, you know, like the whole kind of like kerfuffle that kind of happened, you know, with Elon Musk and all of that, that might kind of sour the deal as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think I'll leave it there. What time is it? Okay, so we've gone for about like 70 minutes. That's fine. Like I said, I'll have to edit out some kind of like sound stuff at the start. So yeah, I'll just do a quick sum up there. So basically, the reason this bill, I think, is there is to, you know, crush dissent, and also because the European Council told us to do it. I think it's shown up how the whole kind of process works. You know, the European Council says something, we write up the legislation in civil service departments, it gets the rubber stamp, but before that they kind of put on a kind of a, well, we need a consultation process, but because like Ireland's kind of, you know, elites or ruling class comes from the same area, comes from the same schools, all of that, you know, they all agree on the same thing. So it's a massively biased sample, but they use that to say, well, the experts told us, and that's how the sausage is made, for lack of a better phrase. That's how they're going to do this with like every other kind of issue. I think more people know that. That's fantastic. That's going to be one of the great offsets of all of this. You know, I think a lot of people's illusions maybe have gone down the Swanee a bit. So I talked about that. I talked about why the media have not been talking about this and like the whole the ditch stuff. And I've talked about like, you know, their statements and, you know, their actual submissions to the you know, their consultation on hate speech. Then I talked about, yeah, like, you know, what are the next stages that could happen with this along the way. But yeah, I mean, ultimately it's a Pandora's box, but I think, you know, the Elon Musk stuff, thank fuck, kind of like took a bit of the sting out of that, which is great, which is wonderful. And like I said before, like, you know, if they were to make an issue about Elon Musk, I mean, like I said before, I would not be surprised if, you know, the whole Twitter file stuff, Elon Musk could like make an absolute fool of the Irish government based on that alone. And that's not even talking about like the you know, the tax stuff and all that kind of stuff. But the only thing I would just say, like, and I'll end it on this, is like, you know, if people are kind of worried about like, you know, saying whatever online, I would just say, like, just with the COVID stuff, you know, like, just be sensible about it, you know. You know, I mean, the people who got in trouble for not wearing masks were ones who were giving kind of like, you know, public order stuff. And they want to go, if they are going to go for people, I mean, if they are going to go for people, they're going to go for the easy targets, you know, and don't do anything. Don't go looking for trouble, or don't do anything illegal, you know, all of that. So anyway, seeing how many people are there in the chat. Andrew, Chris, Forest Spring, Hibernian, Katie, Orla Red, Reb Irish, Lord Boycott. Cool, good stuff. There's a good few people here. Let me just check if there's any comments in the chat there, and if not, I'll leave it here. So no, there isn't. Okay, perfect, good stuff. I hope you had a good weekend. Have a good rest of your weekend, or rest of your week rather. Thanks for the listen, and I will speak to you later on. And there's a couple of little edits I need to do with this. Just there's someone who I think they turned on their microphone by accident, so I just need to edit that out. But it's no problem at all. So anyway, look, I'll speak to you later, and have a good one, and speak to you in a bit. See you now. Bye.